Welcome to the Faith and Arts Project, hosted by the University of North Carolina, Asheville and Black Mountain College Museum and Arts Center. I'm Rick Chess of UNC Asheville. This project offers us an opportunity to explore the rich interplay of spiritual practice, religion, and the arts. The Faith and Arts Research Project focused on conversations with artists and scholars whose work offers us opportunities to consider the connections among religion, spirituality, and the arts in our time will lead into the Faith in Arts Institute. The Institute will be held at UNC Asheville and the Black Mountain College Museum and Arts Center on October 13th through the 16th, 2021. Visit the museum's or UNC Asheville's websites for more information. We'd like to thank the Center for Jewish Studies at UNC Asheville for its co-sponsorship of today's reading and conversation with Aviya Kushner. Aviya Kushner grew up in a Hebrew-speaking home in New York. She's the author of Wolf, Lamb, Bomb, an amazing book of poems published by Orison Books, and the equally amazing The Grammar of God, a journey into the words and worlds of the Bible. The Grammar of God was a National Jewish Book Award finalist, a Sami Rohr Prize for Jewish Literature finalist, and one of Publishers Weekly's top 10 religion stories of the year. Kushner is the Forward's language columnist and previously wrote a travel column for the International Jerusalem Post. She is an associate professor at Columbia College Chicago, a founding faculty member at the Randolph College MFA program, and a member of the Third Coast Translators Collective. Her work has been supported by the Howard Foundation, the Illinois Arts Council, and the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture. Welcome, Aviya. Hello, Aviya. It's so amazing to be here together with you, and I'm so grateful to you, not just for being here with us for this reading and conversation, but for your work. It's those of us who are lucky enough to get to interact with you personally, benefit from your energy, your enthusiasm, your knowledge, your grace, your style. But a lot of people don't get to benefit from interacting with you directly. They get to benefit from you through your work. And the work is so amazing. And today we're here, especially to celebrate the publication of your most recent book, Wolf, Lamb, Bomb by Orison Books. And there'll be information for folks listening to this who want to purchase the book. They can get it directly from Orison Books. They have a great website. They can get it from other sources as well. From their local independent bookstore would be great. So we're here to celebrate this and to hear you read from it and talk a little bit about it, and to sort of explore through your art and through a little bit of a conversation some ways in which religion and art interact with one another in your own work as an artist and in your life, and maybe in other ways as well. And so welcome, and I'd like to turn things over to you now to get us started.
Thank you, Rick. I'm delighted to be here, and it's such an honor to be in conversation with you. I so admire your writing, and I so admire you as a person. And it's just I think probably the ideal reader. So I so appreciate this opportunity to be in conversation, and I'm excited to talk about Wolfland Bomb and talk about all of the elements that went into it. I thought I might go back in time a little bit before we begin and just talk about how this book began. How does it even happen? And so this when my grandfather died when I was 23 years old, and at the time I was really flabbergasted by the fact that there was nothing for a grandchild to do in Jewish tradition. So there wasn't a Kaddish. Kaddish is not for a granddaughter. Yeshiva, okay, you move on. It's not really. And I thought to myself, my grandfather was so important in my life. I need to come up with some way to mark that. So what I did was I went to shul on time for an entire year. And for me, that's very challenging because I'm not really an on time. It's very, very challenging for me to be punctual. My grandfather was a German Jew and he was extremely early. And so in his honor, I woke up super early and I was there before everything started for a whole year. It's the only time in my life that I've done that. And it gave me the opportunity to hear the entire Torah read out loud. But also because I had just finished poetry graduate school and I was sort of in poetry mode, I noticed that Yeshayahu or Isaiah, I was thinking about him as a poet. And I thought, hold on, this is amazing poetry. Forget about the Jewish element, forget about anything else. This is incredible poetry. And that was how it began. So when that year ended, I felt a little sad because I felt that my ritual had ended and there was nothing left for me to do. My grandfather was gone. And I think it started by wanting to continue that conversation. And so I found myself sort of writing to Isaiah and talking back to Isaiah. And that's how it started. And I had no idea that I would be thinking about um, Yeshayahu for years to come. And that as I tried to figure out how do you become a writer, how do you become a poet, how do you do all that, that was sort of my conversation partner, was this ancient figure. But also, I think in my heart, I felt that I was remembering my grandfather in that way and in stretching out that process. So that's just to explain how that started. And yeah, so I thought I would start so when I first started writing these poems, they were very much in present tense. It was what was happening right then. But because I worked on them for so long, sometimes I went back in time and found myself looking from the perspective of the past as opposed to the present. So I thought I would start with a very short poem. It's only 7 lines. It's the first poem in the book, and I wrote it very early on. I think I was 23 when I first wrote it, and then when I came back years later, I changed the perspective. So I moved it back in time. So it's called the Book of Isaiah. The Book of Isaiah. For years, I wanted to be that angry and for it to be that beautiful. I loved the poetry of rage. And now, all I can remember are the hills. I can hear the fire in them, words shaking earth. Even a bull knows its owner, an ass its master. Hear, heavens, give ear, O earth. And something that I noticed in that first round of hearing the whole book of Isaiah in synagogue is that Isaiah is really good at being angry. And when he's angry, it's gorgeous. And that really struck me because something that fascinated me about my own grandfather was how he handled the murder of his entire family. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? Like, is it anger? Is it sadness? What do you do with that emotion? And so I think over the years, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how who in our culture is allowed to be angry? Who gets to do that? And I think just as a woman, I think a lot of times women are not allowed to be angry. And I thought that was one of the, I now understand that that was one of the things that drew me to Isaiah. Um, okay, so the next poem I'm going to read is called Music. It's very short and goes like this. Music. Like a lyre, my head moans for the girls who are taken, the young wives. And I cannot decide if I too want to be a wife, bound and also protected, or if I would rather be a lone crooner in the wilderness, there not by choice, but by a wire, a flame, a pillar, a force of earth. Art is a religion, some say, with a sad nod of their heads, but I think it is also a wife and husband, a god and servant, friend and sweet master, music and moan. And that poem starts off with a little line from Isaiah, like a lyre, my head moans is a riff, and all the rest is not. So that was sort of the way the project started to go. Um, something that Something that I found challenging is you might be able to hear with the book of Isaiah and with music is how do you live between Hebrew and English? How do you do that? And so the book of Isaiah actually, that poem makes use of of multiple translations of Isaiah, different understandings of, is it an ass? Is it a bull? What is that? And I actually want to credit my teacher, Robert Pinsky, who gave me beautiful advice. He said that what you do is you put Hebrew into English. That's what you do. And that you can write a poem in two languages at once. So I wanted to read one of those and thank Robert for his brilliance and his contribution to American poetry and to the world of translation. His poem is called Isaiah Starts It Up. This is the harshest of the 10 tongues men call prophecy. This is the dream of Isaiah, the son of Amoz. This is the scene, the eye, the vision. This is the point where you're not sure if it's sanity or hallucination or finally actual and alarming truth. And no, I won't tell you what tribe I'm from or what land I represent, because I'm all tribes, all lands, all women, all men. So shimu shamayim v'hazini aretz. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Listen heavens and eavesdrop earth. Sit there and cower and hide in the corner. Use the desert as cover and the rain as disguise. Listen to me, O listening heavens, and envelop me, eavesdropping earth. Corn, wheat, soybeans, and sod. Listen until you can forget yourself, so you can bless, confess, bless the bare plains and the blank fields, and become all I in the belly of man. At this point, I just wanted to stop and have a nerdy moment with everyone and talk about the notes in the back of the book. And Rick, feel free to jump in whenever you like. This poem, so until now, the poems have been about my encounter with the Hebrew and the English, but there was someone else in the conversation throughout, and that was the commentators, who are mostly medieval. And they have a lot to say about Isaiah. And I was really, some of the poems came from reading them and trying to understand them and where they came from. So in this poem, I was thinking about the 11th century commentator Rashi. And Rashi wonders why only Judah and Jerusalem are mentioned in the opening of Isaiah, because he points out that Babylon is mentioned later on, and Moab comes in chapter 15, and he's like, hold on, why were Babylon and Moab taken out? What happened? Okay? And so Rashi thinks that maybe Isaiah 1 is not the real beginning of the book, and the real beginning is in chapter 6. And so at the very last minute with Wolfland and Baum, my mother and I spent a lot of time getting this note right. My mother commented on something that I thought was really beautiful. My mother said that every prophet, every book in the prophets has a moment where the prophet dedicates himself to his task. Now that's the moment. And so her understanding is that what Rashi is commenting on is, where is that moment in Isaiah? It comes later with that burning of the lips, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I was very moved by that. Yeah, and Rick, I don't know, have you thought about that, about the dedication aspect of the prophets and how cool that is?
I haven't thought about that. And so it's another way that you're teaching me right here on the spot. So I do want to ask you, a couple of questions.
Yes.
I want to ask you about that dedication, because so much of this book, or one of the threads that runs through this book, is the speaker, I would assume, though I know we're not supposed to make that assumption, but the speaker's acceptance of and dedication and aspiration to be an artist. And I wonder, at what point in your experience did you find yourself making that commitment to art, which involves a lot of sacrifice, as you hint at and suggest in some of the poems, but it also involves a lot of discovery and joy and an ability to see beyond kind of the surface of things and to see in a musical way. Um, uh, I love that poem Music, and I'm really glad that you read it. And I'll ask you some other questions about that, but so much of this book also is about singing. And so that your dedication, how did that happen? What has it meant to you? And maybe there's a poem that you might read from the book or whatever that speaks a little bit to that role of the artist and the choice to be an artist.
What a beautiful question. So many layers to that question. So I'll try to answer and then maybe I can find something that will fit with that. Um, I think that I actually remember the first moment when I decided that I would do this, but I didn't really know what it meant. And it was in college. It was a fiction professor taught a story by William Faulkner, and the story was Dry September. And I remember that every time I read that story, I thought something else happened. And I was really intrigued by that. And I thought, I want to learn how to do that, and I'm going to give it my best shot. And I don't think I looked up or down for maybe 20 years. Like, I don't think I really understood, I don't think I understood what that meant. And you're right, there's such a sacrifice in a life of art. It's so much harder than being I think, being a banker or being many other things. It's a very, very, it, it's a life choice. And I honestly don't think I understood that when I started. And I didn't know what it would mean. And I don't know if it's good or bad that I didn't know what it would mean. But I think it's interesting that you hear the singing because, in religious Jewish tradition, a woman's voice, you can't sing as a woman alone. You can't do that. And I remember being very hurt by that when I was in junior high school. I wasn't allowed to sing a solo ever. And in high school, I had to sing as an alto. I had to retrain as a tenor. I'm an alto, so that you can kind of blend it. There's always sort of these things that I had to learn how to do so that I would never be alone, sort of thing. It's something I really thought about. I will also say that at the very last moment in Wolf Lambam, my good friend, she's a translator and a flamenco singer, read the whole book. We read the whole book together, and she actually sang the problematic lines out loud, and that
Mm.
really helped at the end. So I will say that I'm going to look for a poem that I think fits that, and it actually goes back to that Isaiah chapter where he, I guess, accepts the mantle of prophecy. It was something that really intrigued me for a long time, and the idea that you're burned by it. I thought that was so interesting. Um, and It's a poem called Hallucination,
Mm.
and it's at the very end of the book. And it makes use of a very real conversation I had with a very real living poet who told me, "You're going to do that." I thought he was completely nuts. I'd taken one poetry class. I didn't know what he was talking about. And he was like, "You're going to do this," and
Mm.
I didn't understand at the time. I didn't understand what he was saying to me. I didn't understand it. But now I think I understand better what he was trying to say, and how frustrated he was that he was trying to communicate something so important, and I didn't know what he meant. And I always remember his frustration of that he was trying and I didn't understand. Okay, so the poem is called Hallucination. Hallucination. Fatten the heart of the people until there is total desolation, Isaiah begs. And I want to know how desolate is desolate, whether one son gone is enough, or must it be all of them? Must it be all the cities I have loved, and all the words I have wanted, all the comfort I have known? Must I give up my language and my religion, my God and my land, the crevices of my body, as the old man warned me? I am old, and I know, he said, and then held my shaking hand and said poetry would make me happy, but only after it had taken everything else, after it had left me desolate, my heart thinned to just words. And so Isaiah let the angel touch his lips and burn them. And sometimes I wonder if I imagined everything, imagined my entire life, made up the bearded old man, the magnificent poet whose words guide me, the man whose words have made my life. As perhaps Isaiah imagined he saw God himself on his throne. The being was holy, 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 surrounded by fawning angels with three pairs of fluttering wings. And Isaiah knew he would do everything for that vision. He would give up his life and even his lips, his very mouth.
Mm. Wow, thank you for reading that. That is a killer poem. And your conversation with that poet who told you that you were going to be a poet and told you that you would be a poet and find the joy only after you'd lost all these other things. That sounds so similar to like being called by God to prophesy. I mean, it sounds, whether in real life or not, in the world of that poem, that's the moment where someone is calling you the old bearded man, which I
So
know is a kind of a
he did have a,
cliched image of
yeah.
God, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, the actual poet was, he was, now I don't know if he would seem that old to me, but then he seemed very old to me, and he had a beard, really was a wonderful poet. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's so interesting that so many of the biblical figures refuse it at first. So that's too, it's like I mean I did a lot of things, but that conversation stuck in my head. And
Mm,
and I remember his deep honesty. He said, it's it is hard for everyone, but it's going to be especially hard for you. And he said, you're going to have to get over language, you're going to have to get over religion, and then you will have to get over yourself. And those words really stuck with me for years and
mm,
years. And I of course, I was terrified when he tried to. I mean, I can't even imagine saying that to an undergraduate today. I don't know what he was thinking, but it really stuck with me. Like, it stuck in my mind, and I think he was right. Like, he could see that, you have to. Yeah, I think I just had to figure out the language thing, and you have to. And I think these poems were part of figuring out the religion thing. Yeah.
mm. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, did you get over religion um, in order to be able to write these poems, or through the process of writing these poems? Did religion ever get in the way of writing some of these poems and any of your other work as well? And just so I don't forget, I know we were talking about singing a little earlier, and this is unrelated to the question I just asked you, but that essay on song in the book Grammar of God is so extraordinary, including, the way you really highlight the use of the word almost. Wants to make it almost to the water, wants to make it to the riverbank, etc. So I don't want to say anything more about that now, but then you tell the anecdote of the boy singing the 42nd Psalm that, you were not permitted to sing. So that's a separate theme that we may keep coming back to. But, the other question, let's go with that one, first,
Yeah,
about
I
getting
think
over religion. Yeah.
sure. I think I was ripped apart by this issue for a very long time, and probably two books came out of that experience. I really could not figure out how to be how do I say that? Like, I think there are a lot of people who grow up in religious families and then they leave everything and they become a secular artist. I have good friends who've taken that path. That path is clear to me, but I knew that that wasn't going to be my way. I knew that wasn't for me. So what was I supposed to do? What was I supposed to do? How was I supposed to fit in or not fit, whatever the word was? I think that struggle was very real and very tactile to me for a very long time. And sometimes it was paralyzing. Like, I mean, I certainly knew that I wasn't going to I grew up in Muncie, New York, like I knew that I was not headed for the life of my classmates. Like, that was clear. It's probably clear in kindergarten, but, it took me, I was not going that way. But, I keep Shabbat. I have a kosher home. I always have. I also wasn't secular and never would be totally secular. So, and I think that a lot of artists, most, it's very rare for me to meet a religious artist who's good. Very, very rare. Like, I just don't see that. I do want to note that Hélène Elon's poem is Hélène Elon's work. I wish that book would have been available earlier. It's called Whatever is Contained Must Be Released. She's an installation artist who also came from a religious family, and she writes about it beautifully. So that's a book I can recommend for people who are in this space and don't know what to do. Um, yeah, I think that there's a direct, um, there's both a direct conflict and not a direct conflict. I'm going to see if I can explain that. Like, I think there's a ban against images, right? So my dear friend's a painter. I think that's a clearer problem, so that's clear. There isn't really a ban about, poetry or writing. There's nothing like that. But I think an artist is a questioner in the heart. And Jewish tradition is also built on questions. But I think that there are borders to those questions. And that's the hard part. What happens when you hit the border and you want to cross? And so I think that that was one of the things that attracted me to Yeshayahu, Isaiah, is that he didn't feel hemmed in any way. If he was going to scream, he was going to scream. If he was going to laugh, he was going to laugh. I think that appealed to me. I felt that the more ancient writers were closer to where I might go than some of the contemporary writers. I'll also say that I think in American poetry, out of American poetry, English language poetry, I think direct engagement with Jewish text isn't something that you see a lot. You might see like Jewish history or maybe Jewish style subjects, maybe like Jewish heritage, sort of a Jewish grandparent, something along those lines. But I it's I just had a hard time finding anybody who was actually interested in the text and in those ideas. And I think it's a challenge, for book reviewers and people like that, they don't know what to do. So if you maybe write about, I don't know, your murdered grandmother's candlesticks, that somebody can handle. But if you're going to write about a 12th century commentator and their ideas and how it relates to 2021, I think that's harder. So I don't know if that answers your question, but um, those were some of the things that I felt and
Yeah.
and continue to feel. The only difference is that I'm more comfortable than I used to be. So
Mm.
I'm just more comfortable with it. And I sort of, you know, I think part of it is just getting a little older and just realizing you are who you are and you can't change it. And I think also I thought a lot about both members of my family and artists throughout history and the choices they made. And that helped me also. I realized that my grandfather, was a religious man, but he was very, very into the arts. He didn't see a problem, so I thought about that. Um, I thought about a lot of the Yiddish writers. It's just interesting, or someone like Leonard Cohen, who went to shul. So there are precedents. It's just not something that's super evident.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. It fully, responded to my question and my interest and curiosity. And it also is making me think of your conversation with Adam Kirsch recently, the great writer and scholar, the brilliant person. And when you were talking about does a world Jewish literature exist that transcends geographical national boundaries? And you both came to the conclusion it does. And your deep, direct, and deeply knowledgeable and informed engagement with Jewish texts puts your work like right at the heart of that body of world Jewish literature. So, I would think that any reader, period, could read these poems and be moved and enlightened by these poems. For readers knowledgeable of biblical text and of Torah in particular, they may find a special connection. And it's a way, as Judaism does, of keeping those texts alive. I mean, these texts are they're speaking to us at this and through us at this very moment, and we're speaking back to them and through them, or at least you are in this powerful work. So thank you for that answer. Why don't you read some more poems?
Okay, I'll read. That's such a lovely answer, and I so admire Adam. But I do want to say that that's another thing that made me feel more comfortable, is realizing that a lot of writers who are thought of as world writers, when you actually read them closely, you realize they're deeply Jewish writers, and so many of these writers came from religious Jewish homes. And you can, if you recognize it, and that's just something really, really moving to realize. And I learned that through the translation world and it's that's something else that I really feel. Okay, I'm going to read a short poem, and the reason I'm going to read it is because something that happened over many years is I realized that I was writing poems about the same line sometimes in different contexts. So I'm going to read one that makes use of a very famous line, and then later on you can hear a different or maybe I could read another one using the same line in a different context. This is a short poem. It's called Esteem. Ephraim's envy shall cease, Isaiah says, once the wolf dwells with the lamb. And I take that as saying the jealousy's here to stay. That's why it's all over the Ten Commandments. And as I sit with you at lunch in the little city I now call home and look at your big green eyes, the lusciousness of your beard, the muscles just below your shoulders, I wonder, how you can be envious of anything with all that beauty. I look at you and wonder if love is only envy accelerated, mutual esteem amped to the grab of lust, the desire to possess what beauty another has, to lie not with the lamb, but the growling wolf.
Mm.
That's one I thought about. And I could read another. Should I read another Wolf and Lamb poem now? I'll
Yeah,
just read a
yeah,
different.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to read a very different poem. Um, but that the poem I just read came from reading it. And now I'll read a poem that came from rereading The Wolf and the Lamb and thinking about them for a very long time. So this poem is called Rereading Chapter 11.
Mm.
Something is about rereading Chapter 11. Something is about to dry up the tongue of the Egyptian sea, just seconds after it looked like the wolf and the lamb were about to lounge together. And that's what frightens me, that God or whoever can just dry it all up, take it all away, which is what happened to the brother of the builder of my parents' house, who had his tongue cut out of his mouth at Auschwitz, which sent him into a life without sound, a sentence of being misunderstood. I think of the tongueless man every year on Yom Kippur, the holiest of the holy days, and what makes me tremble are the words, Lord, open my lips and let my mouth utter your praises. Humble, it's supposed to sound. And I know I need to ask for that opening of the lips. And then I remember the lines before that. Man has the inner workings of the heart, and God owns the tongue. But I want the tongue. That's all I want. To have one body part that is mine alone. To say, God, take it all. Control the land. Rule over me all my life. But don't take that. No, no. Don't cut my tongue out. Not that. So that's a poem that makes use of both the book of Isaiah and some of the prayers in the Yom Kippur liturgy. And I always love this repeating section about asking God for the power to speak. And so I thought a lot about this man I've known all my life who it's true he had his tongue cut out, and when I was a child he used to hang around at the playgrounds and he used to make these sounds that I didn't understand, and years later he tried to communicate, and we the children, we didn't know what he was sound, these sounds, and years later I learned that the story of why he was the way that he was, and I just was shaken by it, that this person I had seen all the time was never able to speak again. That was
Mm.
that poem. But I think it's also I think it's also about, the wolf and the lamb. It's a dream. It's a dream of, and is that really going to happen? And so I think that the poem thinks about that, about whether the vision of Isaiah is remotely possible. So that's that. So
Yeah. Incredible. Both those poems are really incredible. I mean, I love how you invite rage into your poems. You invite jealousy into your poems, lying down with the growling wolf. I love that last line of that poem. And in this one, rereading, chapter 11, so moving, both, the actual story of the terrible thing that happened to this man who survived Auschwitz, but without a tongue. And then, your or the speaker's, expression of desire to possess the tongue and not have her tongue taken away. That's like the poet saying, this is what I do. I speak and I sing. And if you take my tongue away, I'm not going to be able to do what I am at the essence of my being. And I think, you've got both sides of that, the situation of like, I can't say what needs to be said. And maybe that even hints at, aside from the historical context, hints at like, okay, there's a limit to the language. And as you write about as a translator and in, the grammar of God, you can't carry everything over from Hebrew into English. But I love the way you beautifully offer some words of encouragement about what one can get and what you have gotten from translation, to see certain things that were made possible because of the historical context in which the translations were done, and the choices influencing, but all the time remembering in the back of your mind, like, this isn't it. There's something else. And so you've got that, both of those are in that poem. It can't be said. I can't tell you what I have to tell you. And please, I demand, don't take away my ability to tell you what I have to tell you. They're both in that poem.
That's so moving. That's so moving. But I also feel like, in a way, this goes back to the question that you asked me earlier about the conflict between art and religion. And so, you have to sit there on Yom Kippur, and actually every day, the daily prayers, you ask God to open your lips. So that idea that, you don't necessarily get to speak. God decide, that's a conflict with the writer who wants to say anything. Like, the writer sort of saying, I want that power. But some of Jewish text is saying, hold on, God gets that power. God gets to decide whether or not you get to speak. And I think I thought about that with what happened to this man. It's like, who you know who owns you, and how does that work? And who it's just, I don't know, it's just something I really thought about. But yeah, I think that's a direct conflict, sort of asking for the power to speak and taking it, claiming it.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I want to just add one other little thing just to share with you, and it has to do with open my lips, that I may sing your praise or whatever. And this may not be kosher, but there have been that's one of my favorite lines in the Siddur and in the prayer service. But there have been times where I've had to do like a lecture or some kind of public talk or whatever, and where I was getting so nervous and freaking out in the minutes leading up to the talk, and I would just repeat that
Oh,
to
oh,
myself and just say,
oh,
Satatai
beautiful.
Tivtaku Via Giti Hilatecha, and just I would just try to give myself the message. Let me just trust. I know I prepared everything I have to say, and I have
Wow.
notes or I have it all written down, but I don't know what's going to happen when I get up there.
Wow.
So please open my lips and let whatever I
Wow.
say be your praise. So I was so
Wow.
delighted to
Wow.
read, the allusion to that, in that particular poem, that
That
for
is so
personal reasons.
beautiful. That's so beautiful. It also makes me think about all the traditions of, walking back, walking forward. Like, there are all these physical movements that are attached to those. But I think it's about the same thing, about just really wanting to have that ability to communicate, and
Mm,
that tension between giving it to God. It's just very interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Oh,
beautiful.
that's
Thanks.
lovely. That's super, super lovely. Um, I wanted to read, let me see if I can get to this one. It's on shards. This is I think one of the things that attracted me to the book of Isaiah was his comfort describing destruction.
Mm,
I think that, sometimes things that happen in the world, we really do destroy other people's lives. And I think that Isaiah is very open about that, and very clear about the complete extent of destruction. And I think we were talking about this earlier. Something that I became very interested in as a journalist was the absence of discussion of aftermath. There's always an event. There's always a bombing, a knifing, a murder, God forbid, all this stuff, right? But what happens to those people afterwards? What happens to those people afterwards? So I think that there are several poems in Wolfgang Baum that think about that, about aftermath. But I can also share that that is what drew me to the essay form. I think the essay allows you to think about roots and aftermath. And I just found that sort of traditional journalism, conventional journalism, often didn't allow room for that. So this is a poem looking at one of Isaiah's iconic lines of destruction, powerful, raging, and about what's missing there. The poem is called Shards. Shards. Babylon has fallen, fallen, and all her idols have collapsed in delicate detail, in precise shards. So says the messenger, so he reports. But I want to know about those shards, the little pieces, the clay survivors of destruction, broken and sinning and once colorful. Tell me, once split, once shamed, what did they do next? Isaiah, you don't say. And the commentators, my old friends, the squabbling men of medieval desks, of Aramaic speaking classrooms, you don't care either. You want to know about the messenger. You're busy imagining Habakkuk and Koresh or the angel of God. You want to know whether fallen, said twice, means Babylon is doomed to fall again. We all are, all doomed, all poised to fall. But I want the details. I want the identities of the little shards, their exact addresses and conditions. I want to visit what once was a god and became pottery, became shard.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's just an example of, I think, what's in Isaiah and what isn't in Isaiah, and how both of those like super interested me. Um, I wanted to read a poem that's an answer to, it's based on a question that I got asked a lot. And there was a time that, I was writing actively in both Hebrew and English, and I really couldn't decide which language to write in and what to do and how it goes. And yeah, and I can share that around the time I was working on this poem, I got a request that I have regretted forever. I was asked to translate Louise Glick into Hebrew, and I
Mm.
said no. And I've always been sorry that I said no. I always think it was one of the dumbest moves of my life, dumbest moves of my life. But I think part of it was I just wasn't sure about, which direction. I was like, where am I in this continuum? Where am I going to go? So this poem is about that question. It's called "Why Don't You Write in Hebrew?" Why don't you write in Hebrew? Because I'm afraid of you, Isaiah. Afraid I'll hear the six wings, two to cover the face, and two to cover the legs, and two to fly. And I ask, how can I praise wings that cover feet and face? And how can I curse when you have already cursed with your carcasses of sleazy financiers, with your ugly and public deaths for those who squeeze the poor, the widowed, the temporarily weak? You ask me to compete head on with you, and I can't because I cannot hear in your presence. You thunder so in the space inside my left ear that I cannot forget you, even for the length of a line, the weight of a tear. So that was yeah, that was that time that I really, and these were questions that ripped me apart for a very long time. And eventually I sort of realized that no matter what I would do, I would always live in the space between languages, and that there wasn't an answer. So I spent years looking for an answer, being like, is it going to be Hebrew? Is it going to be English? And I just eventually, I think I just made peace with the fact that I was never going to know for sure, and that I was going to live between them, and that there were advantages of living in between, such as the ability to translate and the ability to perhaps see things in more than one way. So I learned that might be helpful. But yeah, that was just from that time. Um, I could read another poem that combines Hebrew and English, if you like.
Mm. Yeah,
And
that'd be great.
again, with thanks to Robert Pinsky. It's called Isaiah Gets Feisty. And Isaiah is feisty, which is one of the best things about him. And Isaiah gets feisty. And on that day, the ram's horn will be blown, Uval Valdim, and the lost will come from Assyria, oh yeah, and the forgotten from Egypt, Vanitachim Me'eretz Mitzrayim. And then you little woman of earth will remember God, and his headdress will look glorious to you suddenly. And then you will say, to find what I want, I must return, must come back, must free myself through my past. Go learn from Sennacherib, fat king who thought he conquered with his muscles. Oh, look at the foolish Egyptians who thought pyramids meant permanent strength. You sit and think words will protect you. Oh, who can collect you from the corners of the earth? Adonai Zuz B'Gibor. God is brave and muscular. God is the brave of war, the keeper of the tongues. Open the gates to your head, your heart. Return from your personal Assyria, your endless Egypt.
Mm.
So that's Isaiah's feistiness. I don't know, Rick, are you into feistiness? Is that something that appeals to you and your?
Uh, Well, in my own disposition, I'm kind of meek and mild, but I love reading a feisty poem, and I love reading a feisty prophet.
Ah,
Um,
ah.
but thank you for putting me on the spot and asking me that question.
I guess, the other thing is when something else that happened as time, changed is when I started working on these poems, the villains of Isaiah, Sennacherib, Nebuchadnezzar, these rulers who, caused a lot of massacres and a lot of destruction, it felt super far away, so far away. But after the past couple of years with the rise of authoritarianism that we've all seen, I have to say that the ancient villains feel closer to me. They feel more understandable. And I think that going back to my grandfather and how this project began, I think I understand my grandfather's world better than I did when I started. He spoke about how he went to hear Hitler and how enthusiastic the crowds were. He always talked about that and how people desperately wanted Hitler to be in power and to rule over them. And I think we saw that in the United States. We've seen people be very very attracted to dictatorial figures. And I think the book of Isaiah also describes that these strong men and the effect that they have on civilization. But clearly there have to be people who support them. So that's something that I've also been thinking about. And it's just something I didn't expect. I wanted to move to two poems that are held together by wine. So that's okay with you.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
Wine is always good.
wine is a good way to close, right? And this poem is called Two Love Songs to Denial. It works with one phrase from the book of Isaiah that's set to song. Probably if you speak Hebrew, you'll recognize it. And I just had fun with it. It's called Two Love Songs to Denial. One, when my wine ends, my eye will fall, meaning my tears will cascade, and I will look into the desert of my life and wish for water, little brooks of hopeful water in the hot dust. I will wait for men who will shield me from heavy winds, who will provide shade from the tired earth, but they will not come, will not run to me fast enough, will not understand all they need to understand. And how would they? How can anyone expect the infinite from the finite? And so I will look to the heavens and beg for a rock, a stone, the thump and thud of thunder, music, lightning, presence, a light, and a faraway stage. Two, when I can no longer deny everything I want to deny, when I have to say, I chose it, I asked for it, this life I have been given, this life, the life of a crooner, a bird, a prophet in the goddamn wilderness. I picked it for myself. I chose this fate. I watched my lips burn and took the loneliness and the song and the sweat. I grabbed it. I grabbed it. I was there. I traded love for music.
Mm.
And I'll just read one other short poem about wine, and then I'll see if you have any, because only 4 lines long. It's called Wine. So, same subject, different take. Wine. Now that I finally understand what it means to walk wineless and with sunburned feet through the pages of my life, I know with my mouth and my eyes that I have not died. I have just lived a little.
Wow. I mean, I love these poems that you concluded with both of them. And they also, combine kind of, romantic visions, prophetic visions with artistic visions to give up, love for music. It's just unbelievable. And to walk through the pages of your life. And then that humility. Um, uh, at the very end of that poem, I've lived a little. I just love those poems. And sure, why not read one last, poem on poetry and prophecy? That's a great idea.
Sure. Well, I just want to add one last thing about the
Yeah.
short poem Wine, is that I was thinking of Sappho. There's
Yeah.
that really famous fragment of Sappho that I learned with the wonderful poet and translator Rosanna Warren, and it
Oh,
has that idea of dying a little bit of jealousy and dying a little bit watching the person you want with someone else. And so I thought about that, and I thought I can flip it to I lived a little. So for
mm-hmm.
those who are into Greek poetry, that's an aside. Yeah, I wanted to end with a poem. It's the last poem in the book, and I think this was an intense experience, and I wanted to end on a note of soothing. Um, and that's something that you also feel in the book of Isaiah, that there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of massacre, there's a lot of pain, a lot of acknowledgement of ugliness, both in individual human behavior and political behavior. Attacking the neighbors, of treating people terribly, which we see today with the headlines. You don't have to go very far. But I also think that there's this beautiful, beautiful theme of comfort, and that I think is one of the reasons that Isaiah is such a wonderful poet. And I think one of the reasons Isaiah has lasted is his ability to comfort, both in Hebrew and in translation. So this poem is called How to Soothe. How to Soothe. Speak to Jerusalem tenderly. Speak to her heart. Tell her quietly that it's over, that she's suffered doubly for all her sins. Tell me, Isaiah, is your repetition confusion or just obsession with punishment? Nachamu, nachamu, comfort or comfort, you try later, as if to say, comfort can come more than once too. And maybe repetition is just that, comfort. Oh and ooh, the hum of it like earth's sway in the night, like the space between poetry and prophecy, ancient, circular, persistent.
Mm, beautiful. Nachamu, Nachamu.
Yeah.
uh, um, I love
Isaiah
that.
40, right? The most isn't beautiful, right? Nachamu, nachamu. Yeah.
Yeah, it is beautiful. Well, gosh, I could keep listening to you and asking you questions and sharing with you all day and all night. But we won't do that. But this is a conversation that I hope and trust, will continue. I want to thank you so much for participating in our Faith and Arts project. And I want to remind everyone listening that Aviya has been reading from and
Ooh.
talking to us about Wolf Lamb Bomb. It's an amazing cover, by the way. I won't say anything about it, but
Oh, I can comment.
yeah, you have to have the book for the poems inside, but the cover is spectacular. So you need to buy the book too, because it's a beautiful cover, beautifully designed, great paper. Orison does an amazing job. Um, and so you can find that book at your local independent bookstore and at Orison Books. And be on the lookout, because does events all over the place, and especially now that we're doing things virtually, you can find other readings and talks that she'll be doing on translation from this particular book. And I encourage others also to please read The Grammar of God. These two books work so well together. And so, Aviya, thank you so, so much for spending time with us. And until we get to talk to each other again and hopefully see each other in person one of these days.
Thank you. This was an absolute delight. Thank you so, so much, Rick.